This story begins in the sterile, concrete quiet of a private parking garage beneath one of Seattle's most exclusive high-rise residential towers. On the evening of October 12th, David Sterling, the 38-year-old founder and CEO of a multi-billion-dollar data analytics firm, was stopped by Officer Frank Miller of the Seattle Police Department. Sterling, driving his own car into his own reserved parking spot, was accused of casing the building for a series of burglaries. The officer, operating on the blatant assumption that a black man in a hoodie could not possibly belong in such an opulent setting, escalated the stop from a routine inquiry to a hostile, rights-violating confrontation. What Officer Miller didn't know was that the man he was attempting to intimidate and illegally search was not only a resident of the building's penthouse, but also a key technology contractor for his own department, a man whose software was meant to reduce bias, not become a target of it. The ensuing encounter, captured on Miller's own body camera and the cell phone of a shocked bystander, would ignite a firestorm, leading to a $19 million federal lawsuit and a brutal, public lesson in the high cost of prejudice. The flashing red and blue lights were a jarring intrusion, a violent splash of color against the monotonous gray of the underground garage. They pulsed silently, strobing across the polished concrete floor and the hoods of silent, expensive cars. David Sterling watched them in his rearview mirror, his hand still on the gearshift of his Audi e-tron. He had just guided the silent electric vehicle into his assigned spot, P40, for Penthouse 40, a space he'd paid a small fortune for. A sigh escaped his lips, a quiet puff of air in the insulated cabin. It had been a 14-hour day of code reviews, investor calls, and strategic planning. All he wanted was a hot shower and a cold glass of water. The police cruiser, a standard Ford Explorer, had followed him through the heavy, rolling security gate, tailgating him so closely he'd assumed it was an emergency. But it hadn't turned on its siren, and now it was parked diagonally behind him, blocking him in. A figure emerged from the driver's side. The silhouette was bulky, defined by a tactical vest and a belt heavy with equipment. As the officer stepped into the fluorescent light, David could see a man in his late 40s, with a thick neck and a face set in a permanent scowl. His movements were deliberate, each step radiating an unearned sense of authority. The officer, whose name tag would later read F. Miller, approached the driver's side, his right hand resting casually, almost affectionately, on the grip of his holstered firearm. The gesture was a classic assertion of dominance, a nonverbal warning. David pressed the button to lower his window. The cool, damp air of the garage seeped in, carrying the faint smell of concrete and exhaust. He kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, a habit ingrained in him since his father first taught him to drive. "Good evening, officer," he said, his voice even and calm. Officer Miller leaned down, his face crowding the open window. His eyes, small and hard, swept over David, then the car's interior, then back to David. The assessment was quick, dismissive, and dripping with suspicion. "License and registration." "Now," Miller barked, foregoing any pleasantries. "You know why I pulled you over?" The question was a trap, designed to elicit a confession or a lie. David met the officer's gaze without blinking. "No, officer, I don't. And with all due respect, this is a private garage. You didn't pull me over. You followed me into my residence." He gestured vaguely at the residence-only sign near the security gate, now flashing in the police lights. Miller's lip curled into a sneer. "Funny. I don't care where we are. This vehicle," he said, tapping a thick finger on the car's roof, "matches the description of one used in a string of high-end burglaries in this district. Breaking into nice buildings just like this one." The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. David felt a familiar, weary anger begin to coil in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had learned long ago that reacting with emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford in these situations. It was a tax he paid for his skin color. He calmly reached for the glove compartment, narrating his actions. "I'm reaching for my registration and proof of insurance." "Officer." He retrieved the documents and handed them over along with his driver's license from his wallet. Miller snatched them and shone a blindingly bright tactical flashlight into David's face, then into the car. The beam danced over the passenger seat, where his leather briefcase sat. It contained a laptop worth more than Miller's car and proprietary documents worth more than the entire police department's annual budget. To Miller, it was just a bag. "What are you doing in this building?" the officer demanded, the question loaded with disbelief. "Visiting someone." The implication was clear. "You couldn't possibly live here. You don't belong." "I live here," David replied, his voice still level. "This is my parking space," Miller scoffed, a short, sharp sound of contempt. "Right? Your parking space. Let me see your key fob for the building." "The one that gets you into the elevator." David retrieved the small black fob from his keychain and held it up. Miller didn't take it. He just grunted. His eyes narrowed again, searching for a crack in David's composure, a tell that would confirm his suspicions. He found none. The man in the driver's seat was too calm, too collected. To Miller, this wasn't the demeanor of an innocent resident. It was the cool confidence of a professional criminal. "Step out of the car, sir," Miller commanded, his tone shifting from suspicion to an order. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." The request was a significant escalation. David knew his rights. A traffic stop, even a pretextual one, had limits. "Officer, with all due respect, why do I need to exit my vehicle?" he asked, his tone inquisitive but not challenging. "Am I being detained, or am I free to go home?" The question was precise, a legal fork in the road. It forced the officer to define the nature of the stop. It was a question Officer Miller did not appreciate. His face hardened, the professional scowl deepening into genuine anger. "You're being detained as part of a felony investigation," he snapped, his voice rising in volume. "Now, I'm not going to ask you again. Get out of the car right now, or I will pull you out. Do you understand me?" The threat was naked, a promise of violence. At that moment, the soft hum of an approaching electric vehicle broke the tension. A Tesla Model X glided past them, its occupants, a well-dressed couple in their 50s, slowing down to stare. They were residents. David recognized them from the building's gym. The man in the passenger seat subtly angled his phone, the small red light of a recording app blinking in the dim light. The witnesses had arrived. Their presence changed the calculus. David knew that every action from this point forward would be scrutinized. He also knew that resisting, even lawfully, could give a volatile officer like Miller the excuse he was clearly looking for. He made a split-second decision to comply, to let the officer build the case against himself. "There's no need for that, officer," David said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'm stepping out." He opened the door slowly and got out, keeping his hands open and away from his body. He was of average height, but lean and athletic, and his simple gray hoodie and dark jeans did little to suggest his station in life. That was by design. He hated the performative wealth of his industry. Officer Miller motioned him toward the front of the car with a flick of his flashlight. "Hands on the hood. Spread your feet." The humiliation was a deliberate tool. In the sterile light of his own garage, in front of his neighbors, David was being treated like a common criminal. He placed his palms flat on the cool metal of the hood, the polished surface reflecting the flashing lights back at him. Miller conducted a rough pat-down, his hands lingering a little too long, pressing a little too hard. It was another small act of dominance, a physical reminder of who was in control. "What's in the bag on the passenger seat?" Miller asked, nodding toward the briefcase. "My laptop and some work documents," David answered, his voice muffled by his position. "That's all." "Uh-huh," Miller grunted, unconvinced. "I'm going to need to take a look inside that bag, and I'm going to need to search your vehicle." It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. The final line had been crossed. This was no longer about a supposed burglary investigation. This was a fishing expedition, fueled by a corrosive blend of arrogance and racial bias. David lifted his head slowly, turning to look at the officer over his shoulder. The exhaustion he'd felt minutes ago was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The moment he had been dreading, yet preparing for his entire life, was here. "Officer," he said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its cooperative edge and gaining a new, hard precision. "You do not have my consent to search my vehicle or any of my belongings." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You have my license, which shows my address is this building. You have my registration, which is current. You have my key fob. You have absolutely no probable cause to conduct a search." It would be an illegal search. The legal terminology, delivered with such calm certainty, acted like a spark on dry tinder. Miller's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Oh, we got a lawyer here," he sneered, stepping closer until he was invading David's personal space. A real know-your-rights guy, huh? Let me tell you something, pal. I can smell probable cause from a mile away. I can get AK-9 unit down here, and if that dog so much as sneezes in the direction of your fancy car, I'm tearing it apart. Or, you can save us both the time and let me look. The easy way or the hard way. It's your choice. The threat was textbook intimidation, a tactic designed to make citizens waive their Fourth Amendment rights out of fear and exhaustion. But David Sterling was not just any citizen, and his patience had finally run out. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind a person takes before diving into deep water. The performance was over. It was time to change the script. "Officer Miller," David said, his voice now devoid of any warmth. It was the same tone he used in a boardroom just before firing an underperforming executive. "Your body camera is active and recording this interaction, is it not?" The question caught Miller off guard. "Yeah, of course it is. It's policy." "Good," David continued, turning his body slowly to face the officer directly. "Then for the record, please state your full name and badge number." The shift in dynamic was palpable. Miller, accustomed to being the one asking the questions, found himself suddenly on the defensive. He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Why?" "Because my legal team will require it for the lawsuit," David said flatly. "You are currently conducting an illegal stop inside a private, secured residential building. You have detained me without reasonable suspicion. The vehicle matching a description claim is a flimsy, boilerplate pretext for a racially motivated stop, and we both know it. You followed a black man in an expensive car into a luxury building because you assumed he couldn't possibly belong here. Every action you have taken since has been to try and validate that initial, prejudiced assumption." The couple in the Tesla had now parked and gotten out of their car, standing at a safe distance, their phones still pointed forward. The garage was no longer empty. It was a stage. Officer Miller's face twisted in rage. His confidence, built on a foundation of unquestioned authority, was beginning to crack. "You listen to me," he snarled, pointing a finger in David's face. "You don't know who you're messing with. I'm the law here. Who the hell do you think you are?" It was the question, the one he had been waiting for, the one that exposed the core of Miller's prejudice. It was never about a crime. It was about status. David allowed a small, humorless smile to touch his lips. "That's a very good question, officer. Let me answer it for you." He reached slowly into his back pocket, telegraphing the move so there would be no misunderstandings. "First, I am the man who owns this $150,000 car you're threatening to tear apart." He pulled out his wallet and flipped it open. "Second, I am the man who owns the penthouse apartment on the 40th floor of this building, the one this parking spot is deeded to." He held up his driver's license, where the address was clearly listed. But he wasn't done. He slid a different card from a slot in his wallet. It was a corporate ID, laminated and official, with his photograph, his name, David Sterling, and his title in bold letters beneath it: Chief Executive Officer, Axiom Data Systems. "And third," David said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but each word carrying the weight of a hammer blow, "I am the CEO of Axiom Data, the company that designed and developed the predpol analytics software your department signed a $12 million contract for last quarter. The software that Chief of Police John Carmichael publicly credited with reducing violent crime by 8%. He held the ID up higher, directly in the line of sight of Miller's body camera. "My name is David Sterling. Chief Carmichael and I had dinner last Tuesday at the Rainier Club to discuss Phase 2 of the system's rollout. His personal cell number is in my phone. Would you like me to call him? I'm sure he would be very interested to hear how one of his officers is treating his department's most critical technology partner." The color drained from Officer Miller's face. The change was astonishingly fast, like a switch had been flipped. The aggressive, domineering posture melted away, replaced by the slack-jawed stance of a man who had just realized he'd walked off a cliff. The sneer was gone, his mouth slightly agape. He stared at the ID card, then at David's face, the pieces clicking into place with audible, catastrophic slowness. I, he stammered, the words failing him. I was following procedure." The excuse was weak, pathetic. It was the last refuge of a man caught in a lie. David shook his head, his expression one of profound disappointment rather than anger. "No, Officer Miller. This was not procedure," he said, his voice laced with ice. Procedure would have been running my license plate before you even initiated a stop. My registration is immaculate. My record is clean. Procedure would have been to accept my valid identification and proof of residence when I provided them. Procedure would not involve threats, attempted coercion into an illegal search, or public humiliation. This was not procedure. This was prejudice. And it's all on your camera, and on that gentleman's phone over there. He nodded toward the bystander, who gave a short, affirmative nod in return. We saw the whole thing. The man called out, his voice echoing in the quiet garage. It was completely out of line. Miller looked from David to the witnesses, a trapped animal searching for an escape route where there was none. His bravado had completely evaporated, leaving behind a trembling, desperate man. "Sir, Mr. Sterling, look," he pleaded, his tone now obsequious. "Maybe there was a misunderstanding. I was just trying to be thorough. There was no misunderstanding." David cut him off sharply. "I understood your implications perfectly. I understood your threats. And you will soon understand the consequences." Just then, a second police vehicle, a supervisor's sedan, pulled into the garage. It moved slowly, its lights off. A sergeant got out of the car, a man in his late 50s with tired eyes and silver hair. He took in the scene, Miller looking panicked, the witnesses filming, and David Sterling standing calmly by his car. A look of dawning horror crossed the sergeant's face. He clearly recognized David. "Mr. Sterling?" the sergeant asked, his voice full of concern as he hurried over, pointedly ignoring his subordinate. "Is there a problem here, sir?" David didn't even look at Miller. He kept his eyes locked on the arriving supervisor. "Your officer was just conducting a felony investigation," he said, the words dripping with sarcasm. "He can fill you in on the details. I'm sure his report will be very thorough. In the meantime, I suggest you secure his body camera footage. It is now evidence in a federal civil rights complaint." Without another word, David turned, retrieved his briefcase from the passenger seat of his car, and walked toward the elevator lobby, leaving the two officers standing in the wake of his quiet fury. He didn't look back. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The bystander's video, uploaded with the title "Seattle PD Harris's Tech CEO in His Own Garage," went viral overnight. By morning, it was the lead story on every local news station and was trending nationally on Twitter. The body camera footage, which David's attorneys immediately filed a public records request for, was released a week later. It was even more damning than the cell phone video, capturing every condescending word, every illegal threat, and the exact moment Officer Miller's world crumbled when he saw David's ID. The Seattle Police Department's attempt at damage control was a spectacular failure. Their initial statement, a bland mishmash of phrases like, "The incident is under review," and "We are committed to impartial policing," was met with public ridicule. Officer Frank Miller was placed on administrative leave, a move the public correctly interpreted as a paid vacation. But the pressure was relentless. David Sterling, a man who had always guarded his privacy, stepped into the spotlight. He gave a single, powerful interview, not to a news network, but to a respected legal podcast, where he calmly and methodically dissected the entire encounter, explaining not just what happened, but the legal and constitutional lines that Miller had crossed. He spoke not as a victim, but as an expert. He was, after all, a man who dealt in data, and the data on racial profiling was undeniable. 2 weeks after the incident, David's legal team filed a $19 million lawsuit in federal court against Officer Frank Miller, the Seattle Police Department, and the City of Seattle. The complaint alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, citing a pattern and practice of racial profiling within the department. The lawsuit wasn't about the money. David announced at a press conference that 100% of any settlement or judgment would be donated to a newly formed foundation dedicated to police reform, funding public defender offices, and supporting victims of police misconduct. "This isn't about me," he told the assembled reporters, his voice steady and resolute. "I have the resources to fight this. I can afford the best lawyers. Most people who look like me, who find themselves in this situation, cannot. An officer like Miller can ruin a person's life with a single, biased decision, costing them their job, their freedom, their dignity. My goal is to ensure there are consequences, not just for the individual officer, but for the system that trains, enables, and protects them, the city, facing a public relations nightmare and an ironclad legal case. Move quickly. Officer Miller was fired. The chief of police issued a public apology to Mr. Sterling and announced a complete overhaul of the department's de-escalation and anti-bias training, inviting David's own data firm to consult on the project pro bono. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court for a record-breaking sum. The story of David Sterling and Officer Miller became a national touchstone, a case study taught in law schools and police academies. It was a stark illustration of how quickly the veneer of authority can be stripped away by the truth, and how a single, calm voice, armed with evidence and resolve, could hold a powerful institution accountable. The final image that lingered in the public consciousness was from the press conference. David Sterling, in a perfectly tailored suit, no longer the anonymous man in a hoodie, standing before a bank of microphones. He wasn't smiling. His expression was serious, almost somber. He had won, but he took no joy in it. The victory was not a cause for celebration, but a solemn reminder of the fight that still remained. "This was never about one bad apple," he said, his words echoing across the nation. "It's about the orchard. It's about the soil. And we are here to tend the garden."